I think for us, one of the things that Conway really presented was an opportunity to utilize the great beginning bones. That's the thing that really struck me most importantly, was it was there. It was really sitting there, and the opportunity to make great improvement to the property from that standpoint, from a strategic standpoint and an aesthetic standpoint as well, was really palpable.
I'd say from when Tom Fazio designed the course and it was put together, it was sort of designed as a 67, 800 yard golf course that would be a nice test, but really a pretty friendly member golf course in every way. We're on nearly 220 acres of property, so we have the ability to have a bigger golf course, and it had big bones even back then. And it started with some kind of bigger, longer tees, and then some different bunkering, all the way to the current time where Tim Jackson and David Kahn had put together this new golf course that's almost 7,500 yards from the very back, and bigger in breadth and width in every different direction. So it's really evolved.
The thing that stood out to me was the scale. I'd always heard that it was the second biggest build out on tour, so you knew space was available for that. But the first time I stood out there, it happened to be they were set up for the tournament, the space that was available. If we had an idea that we could communicate, that the club liked, we weren't confined by by homes left, homes right. The routing itself was really pretty strong. The spaces that were available just gave us, I wouldn't say unlimited opportunity to do whatever we wanted, but we just weren't really handcuffed from a creative brainstorming standpoint, and it was really fun.
The old golf course had a number of challenges. It did have great bones. It was set up for success when they built this property. But some of the things that we struggled with, I would say, on a more day-to-day operational sort of challenge, was just the age of the asset. When a golf course turns 25 years old, there's just certain things that start to fail. We did need a new irrigation system, or we're kind of in that time frame where we were starting to look at one. And certainly the bunkers were probably the biggest driving force here for what we did on a daily basis. Our biggest challenge, I would say. After a rain event, we would essentially have to allocate our entire crew to repairing washouts where all of the sand would come off the faces of these steep flash bunkers. So it was just a massive amount of time that would take place for the grounds crew to go out after a large rain event, where we would allocate 20 plus people their entire day, possibly more, to pumping out the water that was in the bunkers, and then also pushing up the sand. And then they really wouldn't still play very well for the next 2, 3, 4 days, depending on conditions. So that was a huge hurdle. It really detracted from the amount of work that we could do on the important playing features of the golf course on those days where we had to allocate our entire staff to the bunkers.
The existing bunkers at Conway were what we would describe as just kind of open clamshells for the most part. Not a lot of articulation in the movement on the bunkers. A lot of high flashing faces of sand. So from an aesthetic standpoint, bunkers many times are the contrast in the visual scene as you're playing golf. We spent a lot of time on the detail of the bunkers because they can have an amazingly impactful presence on how a golf course looks. I mean, a lot of golf courses are really defined by the look of their bunkering. So for us at Conway, it was really creating more broken articulated movement, creating better sight lines into the bunkers that we were creating. Again, a lot of the contouring was so well set up to accept where we wanted to place bunkers.
You know, my first impression of Conway was just how natural of a site it was, right? It's in the name, Conway Farms. It was a farmland, it still looked like farmland. And the old bunkering was very divergent from what I would call a really kind of naturally feeling, exposed area of sand. It felt very manufactured and man-made. So to Tim's point, trying to get that broken line, that more rugged look, was definitely something that we saw right away.
From a functional standpoint, obviously, creating bunkers that were much less maintenance for the club as far as when they had to recover from rainstorms was kind of job one.
The bunker performance now is it's light years ahead of where we were. It's incredible to come in here after a rain. Realistically, the crew can get through the bunkers after a large rain event without pumping any water. The sand stays pretty compact on the faces, so it tends not to want to slide. But we'll send 2 or 3 people around to just go check those little washouts versus 20 people spending an entire day. Which really what it allows us to do is take care of greens, tees, fairways, all of the sort of the highest playability areas that we want to maintain to their usual standards. So after a large rain event, what I see is that there isn't this drop off in what we're doing throughout the whole property, and certainly not more than a day of disruption. It's an incredible thing from where I was 20 years ago. My mindset coming in after a rain to where I'm at today, it's a total 180 from where we were at. It's also tremendously helped, I would say, morale on the grounds crew, that after a big rain event in July or August, that they don't have to come in here on a 90-degree day and slop sand up and do really back-breaking work. So not having to spend so much time on bunkers allows us to really start to fine-tune these other areas that we want to play a certain way and make the golf experience one of the best in the area.
How did you guys approach, continuing to be able to test the best players in the world?
I really think it comes down to angles again, not to harp on that, but that's how you test the best players in the world. We were able to add length in a couple of spots, but I think, most people are smart enough to realize that just adding length doesn't make it harder for the best players in the world. Those guys are good, and gals. I think the other thing with the angles is, number 7 and 15 both are strongly improved with navigating certain angles and avoiding others depending on where the hole location is. And having, a little bit more of the shortcut uneven lie runoff areas around the greens. I think that's a way to test the best players in the world. Just because you missed the green, we didn't want to give them an obvious, all right, they just have to chip it onto the green and try to make a putt. We wanted to get them to think, do I want to putt this? Do I want to bump and run it? Do I want to hit a hybrid? Do I want to flop it? Those are the subtle ways that you can test the best players in the world. Give them doubt, present them with options. All the while, it wasn't necessarily the number one goal of the project by any means, but, we really looked at all the tee sets individually and saying, how can we maximize the potential of all these tee sets? And obviously the back tee sets were the better playing membership and the tour players or competitive golf events that would come there. And then marching all the way to the newly created forward tee set, we really stood on every tee and tried to embody ourselves with that particular player and say, all right, how are they going to get around this golf course? Not how are they going to get around it easily, but how are they going to experience it, and how can we best maximize their enjoyment out there.
There were so many holes at Conway, again, that the bones are really good, but there are a lot of straight golf holes. Angles are so important in great golf course design, and the opportunity to have a golfer or a member experience the opportunity to play a different angle and have a different result from that, and so that was really a big goal, I think, from a functionality of a design standpoint as well. I mean, 14 I think is probably, prime example number one. And as much as we created an angle, we also created a carry opportunity as well, which is more the heroic strategy as opposed to the subtle strategy. I think, the in-your-face strategy off 14 is, hey, if you can carry these bunkers, you can get a speed slot. Now you have an advantage on the golf hole. The subtle strategy is if you choose not to, playing to a distance, to an angle, playing further left off the tee. There's a bunker on the left-hand side now that also pinches in the further you go up the golf hole. Understanding, distance control and where you should hit it. There's a lot of things to think about that you never had to think about before. Quite honestly, on number 14, you really you roped it straight down the golf hole, you were fine. Today, there's a lot of different ways to play it, and there's a lot of different results for how you potentially play it.
The new 15th hole really allows for, that drivable option for almost every level of player. So, I mean, it can be a hole that from the more forward tees can be 240 yards or something, and all fairway grass that the ball can be bounced up. But then there's some obstacles. There's some things. The ball doesn't always bounce exactly like you wanted it to, or like you'd hoped it would.
The whole redesign kind of started with the green, and we worked backwards. Just with the length and linearity of that lake, we devised a green complex that really ran alongside of it. It ended up being about 73 or 74 yards long, which is a fairly distinctive green shape, which I think will be a lot of fun and frustrating for golfers, which was kind of the goal. We didn't want to create any sort of bunkering strategies or too much hazards other than the green and the water. We did sprinkle in a couple of small pockets of sand just to make you think in the layup if you didn't want to go for it, depending on the day's condition or your skill level. But it's going to be a really exciting golf hole near the end of the round, and kind of can't wait to hear some feedback after it's played for a season or two.
One of the things that makes great short par fours is that you can play them conservatively and make a four pretty easily all day long, and you might make a better number if you hit a great approach shot. But if you're overly aggressive and if you're out of position, at times 4 becomes a pretty difficult score, and that's great. Variety in scoring on short holes, I think, is a great identifier of the quality of the golf hole. If the numbers, the scores that are made are highly concentrated, then it's probably not that good of a golf hole. And I think 15, there is potential for a great diversity in scoring, which will be great.
Now it just seems like this unbelievable opportunity to go for the green on most every occasion versus before, where it was virtually the same yardages, but it didn't always allow conditionally for that ball to move on the ground in the interesting ways that it can. And I think it makes you think every time you get on, what's the best way to play this?
I think there's just so much more thought now in how every shot is executed, which I think is really what golf is about, is thinking through your round. And what we didn't have before, with a lot of hazards along the edges of the features, kind of on the sides of fairways, not hugging greens all that closely, was you could play a pretty similar game every single day, or at least strategy of how you're approaching hole by hole. Whereas now I think you have to think every single hole slightly different given on whatever that day is throwing at you. And I think that's a really fun thing, particularly for people that come out here every day and experience it. It provides a unique experience every single day.
And simply put, if they, just to hear that we've improved the experience, they enjoy it more. They love bringing out guests and hearing their, satisfaction. And anything is icing on the cake. We're proud of what we've done. We know the club is proud of what has been accomplished. Even the smallest positive feedback is wonderful to hear. We don't have big egos. We don't necessarily need to hear it, but it's great when people make a point to go out of their way to express that to us. It's not lost on us at all.
Yeah, and it's really about the feedback from the members. It's their golf course, and it's something obviously they take a lot of pride in. And again, if we've had an opportunity to make it that much more interesting or that much more engaging for them and their guests, then that's everything.
It warms my heart to know that we've played a role in just giving them a better experience.